It's 7:04. We'll call the meeting to order. All members are present with the exception of Chairman Smaglia, who is under the weather this evening, won't be joining us. We'll start with the transmitting of Treasury warrants 45, 45A, 46, and 46A.
Motion so moved.
Second?
Made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. We have the approval of minutes for November 22, 2010, April 11, 2011, and April 25, 2011. Why don't we take up November 22nd and April 11th together? Do we have a motion on those two?
I would move to approve the minutes for November 22nd and April 11th.
Second.
Made and seconded. All in favor? That's 3 in favor and 1 abstention. And then we'll take up the minutes of April 25th, 2011.
Make a motion that we accept those minutes.
Second?
Made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. Our 7 o'clock appointment this evening is with Sharon A. George, Town Clerk, and members of the Board of Registrars regarding a discussion relative to the updated precinct map. And in addition to Mrs. George, we also have the chairperson of the Board of Registrars, Patricia Ward, and we have Mr. Souza and Alice Hooper joining us as well. Good evening.
Good evening. I sent you all a copy of the new draft map now that they're called. And I'd like to bring your attention to some changes. Now, this was the simulation map that we talked about the last time, okay? And I'm not sure if anybody compared the two maps, but this was the action. Now, these were the numbers that were given to them through a whole program that we did in 2009, just to refresh, because Selectman O'Connell wasn't there. The program that we did in 2009 to kind of get ready for the 2010 census. So somewhere around March 15th, the real numbers came in, exact numbers from the 2010 census. And with this draft map came some changes. This map had a maximum and minimum of 3%. This one has 5%. And you can see that the biggest growth was in 5 and in 6. And they're offloading a lot of that growth into 4. Okay, if you look at the shape that 4 has taken, in the simulation map, there's just this one area right here that looked like was going to be affected. But now it's a greater area going down kind of as a pie shape, almost down to the side of Precinct 3, making Precinct 3 smaller. And there are other also changes that from this map, it looked that we would have a lot of resident voters to contact by mail, but now it's looking like there will be even more that will need to be contacted with this new version of the map. Okay. The colors are pretty much self-explanatory from the old, except right on Precinct 1. Engineering has noticed that at Wild Ave, there's this little jog in it, and then it comes down straight. If you look at the 2003 precinct map, it just comes down straight, so that's something that we're going to address. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll take questions. If you have questions that I can't answer tonight, I will take down all of your questions, and I will call the coordinator of the program for the re-precincting, and I will get back to you.
Okay, just in terms of the minimum and maximum that you referenced, can you just explain for the benefit of the public what you're referring to when you talk about the minimum and maximum?
Well, over here on the simulation map, you can see that pretty much they've averaged everything out to 3,700, kind of like spreading around everything, so it met the 4,000 limit of residents in one precinct. And over here with the actual numbers in, it brought in 5 and 6, it brought us that much closer to that 4,000 mark. And I'm going to assume, I'm not really sure, and I will call them and ask them, but I'm going to say that that may have changed, the maximum and the minimum.
Okay, so when you say maximum, is it 5%?
Yes, over here it was 3%, but they were looking at a high number of 38, 39. Now we're looking at a maximum within 5% of 3907.
Oh, okay. So yeah, in other words, the minimum and maximum are references to the minimum number of people in the smallest precinct in terms of population, and the maximum being the most heavily populated precinct.
Exactly.
And they're within it?
5 and 6 are within that by about 80 residents,
Okay.
that maximum.
All right, so in terms of the
108.
Are you going to the 38?
Yeah. But
The maximum for a
100.
precinct is 4,000. So if it gets bigger than what we have now, you're going to go through this again.
That's the only explanation that I can have for it. If somebody else has, understands the, I guess better than I, then, and again, I will call tomorrow and find out about the minimum and the maximum.
Okay, in terms of what the town will need to do going forward, I understand that based on the draft simulation, X number of letters needed to go out. Now, based on the most recent map, it sounds as though more people are being reassigned to a precinct.
Well,
How many people are we talking about?
I'd have to do up a list, but there's a lot of streets that need to be notified, so let's see.
Each of these that have changed within here would be notified. You didn't send out when the original draft, did your letters? It's just on this one.
Oh,
now.
no.
Yeah,
No, just on
just
this
this one now. Once it's accepted, the letters will go out.
Yeah, and that won't probably happen until the end of the year. It has to be done before the March 2012. All the re-precincting of voters has to be done by the presidential primary in March of 2012.
Okay. Anybody else up here?
If I may, just so that I'm clear, I'm just crunching some numbers here. So the total population, that's our actual counted heads. That's not voter population, right? 22,325?
I projected with the program that we used in 2009 that the population estimate, okay, and all of these are estimates, would be around 22,362. And when the numbers came in, the population was 22,325, so I think we were, very close.
Sharon, if I may, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So let me continue with my, I don't even know if I'm going to build to a question. I just want to make sure I understand the process. We've got 22,325 heads in town across 6 districts, precincts,
Yes.
which that math gives you 3721, target population, the middle column.
Right.
At the top. 5% less of 3721 is 3535. That's the minimum we can have in any precinct.
Right.
And 5% more than 3721 is 3907. That's the maximum we can have in any precinct.
Right.
So we see in our heavily dense, or our heavily populated precincts, as you indicated, 5 and 6, we're at 38, 26, and 23 respectively. We are, just slightly under 100 shy of hitting our 5% max. Or I'm not 5%, I don't want to say 5%, hitting our maximum threshold before we have to go through this exercise again. 100 people.
Right.
So I guess what I'm getting at, maybe the question I've just built myself into is there a process that we could have followed or could follow that would maybe expand that number to 200 or 300 or whatever the greatest number possible? I'm just concerned that your time and energy and all this exercise of redistricting and telling our residents within those district precincts that they're going to have to change, that's a lot of work and energy, and all of that equals money. And to have to go through that again potentially, I mean, well, when? Would it be in 10 years again? Or?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's,
It wouldn't happen again before the 10 years. It's only once every
no,
10.
it's only every 10-year
Okay.
census, and it's been like that for as long as I can
But this
remember.
redistricting doesn't happen exclusive or separate from the census.
It's after the federal census every 10 years.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, not to my knowledge, it doesn't. And I think with the new numbers that were the actual numbers, that in looking at that, they had to do more rearranging than they had to here. And I looked back at the 2000, and I looked back at 1990 also. And in 2000, there wasn't that many changes, but I think that there's been a lot of build-out since 2000, and hence with apartment buildings and things like that, we have new apartment buildings on board that weren't. I know that Avalon Oaks was here in 2000 and Evergreen, but some of the newer places that have come up, like Regency Park and a couple of others, they were not here. So I think that has boosted our population as well as, and not only that, just, home build out also.
It says draft. When does it become the real deal?
When you vote on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Then, assuming that happens, where can residents who may be concerned that they live on one of these lines, can they get access to this map on the town website or call you, or where can they get clarity as to whether or not they may or may not be affected by this?
Well, this is going to go in as a draft map with the Board of Selectmen's vote. But that is not to say that from here, June 15th is the cutoff day. It has to be done by then. And then I send everything into the Secretary of State's office, one copy to them and another copy that goes to the committee that's going to oversee all of the drafts, okay? And if they want to make changes, they did not have this committee in 2000. Okay, so it's supposed to help speed up the process. In 2000, it was a very lengthy process to get the final maps back to the towns and cities. It's not to say that they can't make a change if they want to. And I can find out more information about that also if you would like. But from here, that's where it goes to the next point. And by August 15th, they're supposed to have the map finalized. And somewhere in September, we're supposed to get a final re-precinct and map. And at that time, or after we would notify the voters. Right now, I'm not sure that I would want to put the map up online because it still is a draft map, and everybody will be notified in plenty of time for any precinct changes at all. By statute, we have to notify them 3 weeks before it has to be done by the presidential primary of 2012. And statute states that it has to be within 21 days of the next election, but I wouldn't even bring it that close. I would probably start doing it at the end of December or the beginning of January, at the very, very latest. So the, voters would have plenty of time to be notified of their changes and also call the clerk's office if they do have any questions or anything like that, because there will be some residents that are also changing polling places.
Thank you.
Anything else from up here?
And the Board of Registrars met on Thursday, May 19th, and took a vote regarding the draft re-precincting map, and it was a vote of 4 in favor, 0 opposed to recommend to the Board of Selectmen approval of the draft precincting map as presented.
Okay, and that certainly goes a long way with me, and I suspect the rest of the board. Just for informational purposes, though, going forward, can we be sure, especially leading up to the time that we notify people, somebody in the audience the last time we had this discussion made a valid point about Precinct 3. I mean, it's certainly is important that people know where their polling location is and what precinct they're in, and, as a matter of convenience and courtesy. But in terms of actual government, Precinct 3 obviously is the one that's different for us because Precinct 3 has a different state rep. So
Exactly.
if we could be sure to, make sure that we don't miss anybody in terms of identifying who's got a change in their state representative.
I'll just go over the process briefly. Once we receive the final map back in September, I'll start pulling up lists of all the streets, putting them in by name, each street, and pulling up all the residents, on that street, and the voters of that street. And I will do my very best not to miss anybody, but there will be things in the paper also. I mean, I will speak to the newspaper about the re-precincting, and that people should be expecting letters in the mail. And if you don't get a letter, that does, then you're not moving anywhere. But if you think you may be moving, please feel free to call the clerk's office.
Okay. And then just one last thing, in terms of the recommendation from the Board of Registrars, I would infer from that you have become convinced as a board that this does the job and inconveniences the fewest amount of people. Is that fair to say?
Most of the changes, as far as inconveniencing people, I know, like you're losing some in 3, but 3 and 4 go to the Wildwood. This one here coming out of here going into 5, those people will, instead of being voted to Wildwood, will vote here now. And other than this little section here, 1 and 2, that's the only change, because they're still within the same voting place. So it shows very little. Well, this little bit here coming up, but that's 5 and 6 too, so they'll still be the same polling place, which is the confusion for people when they have to go to a different polling place.
Right, okay, so that connection between 4 and 5 is really the biggest impact on people in terms of their polling location.
4 and 6
that goal,
also.
no. Okay.
4 and 6, too.
Gotcha, okay, I see that.
But they're within, it's like here, if somebody comes in thinking they're voting in 5, they've got to come over to 1, which is minimal. This here, again, is not too populated from what streets are showing, but again, it's, that would be affected, and these would be affected as far as changing where they go. Well, these wouldn't change where they go, just this and this, actually.
Thank you.
And I would probably pull up the lists of people, voters, that have to change polling places first to get them out of the way, and then go into mail them probably very closely together. But I would do the people that are changing polling places first, just because they're the ones that are going to be affected the most. It's not really a big deal if you go from 3 to 4 or from 5 to 6, but it is a big deal if you have to go from the Wildwood over to Town Hall.
Okay, and if I understood you earlier, you were asking for a vote of the board tonight? Is that true?
If you feel comfortable with voting on this, if you don't, there is one more Board of Selectmen meeting before the deadline of June 15th.
Any thoughts on that from the board?
I don't have a problem taking a vote tonight unless we have one more meeting and maybe Lou will be here. That way everyone has an opportunity to vote on it. So if it's not an emergency, whatever is the pleasure of the board. If it helps out the clerk.
Whatever you want to do is fine with me.
I'd say even though it's every 10 years, it's a learning experience for me too here. So it's interesting what's going on. So whatever we decided to.
I think you made a good point, Mike. I'm glad you brought it up. I think given the fact that this is only something we cross every 10 years, maybe the chairman would want that privilege, or we ought to afford him the opportunity to voice his opinion, or at least have a say in the vote. If it's not an objection, or if it's not going to delay any of the processing,
No.
I don't see any harm in waiting for Lou to get beyond on scene. That's my inclination, anyway.
Do you want any information to come back for that vote, or are you?
Actually, I was wondering, as I listened to the comments being made, would it be your intention for you to come back yourself now that we have the recommendation of the Board of Registrars? Would you intend on, I hate to
plan to call
impose on
the
them.
coordinator myself tomorrow, because I do have some questions regarding some of the, just in Precinct 4, the changes that they made, and I would like for them also to explain to me the minimum and maximum, and how that's being affected.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me as though you think it's just as good an idea to come back in June.
I do.
so-
I have no problem with coming back in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
That would be, I think, June 6th, I think.
13th is the next
June
meeting.
13th. Okay.
June 13th is the board's next meeting. So I
Okay.
think you said the 15th is
Yes,
the date?
so that would be, I would have to have everything up to the Secretary of State's office within 48 hours, but I can have almost everything ready by then,
Okay.
and just have the vote actually to certify.
Yeah, I'm hearing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would agree with everything that's already been stated. The only other observation that I've just made is just the variances seem to be quite a swing among the different precincts. Where on the draft simulation, there seemed to be, in my viewpoint, a more even distribution, where there's much more of a variance factor throughout all precincts in the revised draft. Just curious.
Well, this is only driven by the 2009 numbers. The draft is driven by the actual numbers, the hard numbers that came in for Massachusetts in each one of the cities and towns. So I believe that that's what's driving the variances. And also the other changes that they had to accommodate for.
Okay.
But if you have other questions, I'm happy to ask them tomorrow, and at the next meeting, I will have them for you.
Are you trying to determine whether or not the precinct map, the way it is in the draft simulation, is more advantageous than in the new draft? I mean, I'm looking at it, and it certainly looks like there's much less of a variance. I mean, they used a different variable at 3% as opposed to 5%. And it appears as though less people are affected by the draft simulation. So maybe we could try to find out why have they chosen the new one as opposed to the old one.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is over here, you see that everything's around 3,700-ish, where you go, the high end, the max is like say it closer, the max is, 38, and then you go down, as low as 35, almost, 3,600, versus them all being kind of close together, number-wise. Could just be a function of pulling a couple streets out and moving them over, and that would be the swing.
Okay, well, and this is the time to do that, so I will call tomorrow and ask about that.
One point I would make is if we were trying to project where there would be additional growth, it appears as though that you could have additional growth in Precinct 3 based upon the Diamond Crystal, 10 Burlington Ave. I don't think that these folks took that into consideration. I don't think that was one of the considerations, but they may have lucked into it because there's a lot less people there. So if we do if they go forward with 108 units, you could be talking about the potential of 150 voters, which would make that bring it back up. But I think that's more luck than anything else, because we didn't provide them with any of that kind of information. They never looked for that information.
Based on the comments that were made, I have no objection to waiting till the next meeting, so is everybody still on board with that? If that's the case, I don't think we need to take any action tonight. We'll just see you on June 13th.
Okay. And I will try to have the questions answered for your next packet that goes out on the off week, so you have a chance to look them over.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And thank you to the members of the Board of Registrars, too. Appreciate your time. I will move to communications.
Mr. Chairman, you have a copy of a memorandum from Senator Tarr and also additional information that I provided regarding the Senate Ways and Means fiscal year 2012 local aid budget proposal and its effect on the town. The Senate Ways and Means Committee released its budget proposal on May 18th, and it's pretty much consistent with their local aid resolution back in April, as well as the House version of the budget in terms of local aid as it affects Chapter 70, education aid for cities and towns, and for unrestricted general government aid. In both cases, they were consistent in that they increased somewhat the statewide total for Chapter 70 education aid, and the budget reduced the unrestricted general government aid for communities. One note that I would make, and Superintendent Benton is already in touch with Senator Tarr, is that the Senate Ways and Means Committee, when they released their fiscal year 12 budget recommendations, funded the kindergarten, full-day kindergarten grant program $2 million less than they did in fiscal year 11. And this program, as you know, in Wilmington has been very successful, and we've relied to some extent on full-day kindergarten line item from the state budget. So we're certainly hoping that this will be resolved before a final version takes place. provided the board just with the local aid spreadsheet that really shows the same numbers that we talked about the last time, very minor variations. This Senate Ways and Means budget, the numbers in terms of unrestricted general government aid are the same exact numbers as the governor's and the House final budget. And the number for Wilmington in terms of Chapter 70, again, the same exact number. So it is, what we're seeing has been pretty consistent. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but those numbers are what we expected to receive when we reported last on the House version of the budget, and at that time we noted that the Senate had passed their resolution indicating that they would not present any local aid numbers less than what the House did, and that's exactly what they did.
So you're able to, in assigning budget and potential expenditures, these numbers are consistent with what you were planning for?
Yes, consistent, and probably will give us a little bit of room, going forward if there is a problem, because we budgeted so conservatively initially back in January. I don't anticipate any need to make any changes at this point.
Good, thank you.
You also have an MMA alert regarding the Senate Budget Committee's entire fiscal year 2012 budget proposal, which again speaks to municipal health insurance reform. The Senate version is a little bit different than the version offered by the House. The Senate will begin their deliberations on the budget itself on Wednesday, and it will include discussion of the municipal health insurance plan. Like the House passed plan, it allows for plan design changes and also allows communities to join the GIC, but it also sets up a process that provides unions with more of a say. The Senate proposal gives unions a voice, but not a veto over plan design changes, and it also requires a greater amount of savings, 33%, to be shared with employees in the first year of any change than it does in the House, which was at a 20% level. Neither plan is panacea. I think we would obviously like to have the same opportunity that the state has in terms of their design plans, just come up with a cost-efficient design plan and go forward. The devil is really in the details for all this, and we don't really have all the details. We also don't have a final budget or a final municipal reform act as far as insurance is concerned. Nothing has been voted on. It's my expectation the Senate will come up with whatever their final version is. They're going to be looking at various amendments that senators will present on the floor of the Senate, and then they'll go back and pass something and then conference with the House, and ultimately they will either come up with a plan or they will vote against a plan. But again, it's unclear as to how one would calculate savings, for example. There's one section that says if you can get a deal done with the union within 30 days, then you only have to share 20%. But if it goes over 30 days, you have to share 33%. I'm not sure who's getting the incentive to get it done. There's an incentive for the town to get it done, but not an incentive for the union to get it done. So when I say the devil's in the details, those are the kinds of things that we really need to wait and see what all this means. And we can come back at the June meeting if we have more information, I suppose, and try to give you a little better sense of what this might mean for the town. At this point, every time we've analyzed whether or not it would make sense to join the GIC, the answer has come up no. That both from an employee point of view and from the town's point of view, it makes better sense not to join the GIC. That's something we've been doing, pretty much routinely over the last 2 or 3 years. And again, we can speak to that if the board is so inclined to have this as an agenda item.
So maybe I misunderstand things, so allow me to ask stupid questions. If the Senate votes and effectively approves their version, and it goes to the governor's desk, and the governor signs it, and so it becomes the law of the land, so to speak, then we, Wilmington, and every other municipality in Massachusetts will be able to affect or make changes to health insurance plans for our municipal employees outside of the scope of the unions bargaining with us. So that one component of what we currently engage in with them through collective bargaining will be removed from the collective bargaining process, and it will be an administrative task that, how will that be conducted going forward?
I don't think that's necessarily what would happen, because the original versions of this was looking for that. That is exactly what the state does. The state determines what the best plan design is, and the unions don't have any say over that. As we read this, we would have to have a meeting with the unions to discuss plan design. The difference is that in the House version, ultimately, whatever you come up with, you meaning the community, would become the law, and you would have to share some savings. With the Senate version, they attach an arbitration panel that would end up making the final decision. That doesn't give me a lot of comfort. So they would have a 3-member arbitration panel, one selected by the union, one selected by the town, and the other appointed by the governor, or whoever he designates to make that appointment. And, you would be at the mercy of that panel. So obviously, we would rather work that out with the employee groups if we can't have what we really want, and that's the opportunity to plan design the same way the state does. No one at the state has yet to answer the question as to why it's okay for the state to have this, yet the legislative leadership and the governor believe that the municipalities can't have that same opportunity.
I've been puzzled by that notion, that very statement. I can't understand the rationale behind it. And I've asked a few folks, and I've gotten the same sort of puzzled response that you just gave. So thank you for helping clear it up.
And I assume Senator Tarr knows full well where we're coming from.
He does.
Okay.
Do you want me to speak with the chairman about having an insurance discussion at the next meeting, or is that something?
I would say this, if you could make sure that the chairman knows this, was a pretty detailed discussion about this, and depending on what the Senate does, you have to proceed accordingly.
Okay.
I was going to say the same thing. Depending on what happens over the course of the next 5 to 8 days, it may have a dramatic impact as to what we have to talk about the next time we're together.
Okay. Thank you. The board has a letter from Amy Manley, the Community Relations Specialist for ITT Technical Institute. As the board is aware, ITT Technical, one of their campuses is now in Wilmington, 200 Ballardvale Street, where the AGFA site is located. And they have a request for the board to support the establishment of MBTA bus routes from the Wilmington train stations to Ballardvale Street. And Ms. Manley wrote on behalf of their campus director, Dr. Nadine Dowling, to ask help in getting these bus routes. They have a student population of between 500 and 600 students, and also in the complex they have an additional 400 people at that location. They've indicated that they've seen a significant decrease in student enrollment since moving to Ballardvale Street approximately a year ago, and that the reason they believe is that there is no public transportation. They formerly were in Woburn. I did have an opportunity to visit with them this past Thursday evening at both a job fair and an orientation session, and I toured the facility. I think it's a very good operation that provides a high level of service to a diversified group of students, but they are having some difficulties in their mind in getting transportation there. I also talked with one of the dean of students who related the same situation. They are in contact with the MBTA, and they've been told that the next Service and Planning Committee review, which meets only once every 2 years, will be reviewing requests in September of this year. And they're looking for support of the Board of Selectmen because they believe any support from the town would enhance their opportunity to have their request approved.
Could you, and I'm sure that you're looking at this anyways, but between now and then, could you take a look and try and figure out if there's any way that the town can support an initiative like that without any financial cost to the town? I don't know, I guess this could be as simple as lobbying MBTA representatives to, I wonder if there are kind of partnerships they can enter into with other employers in the Ballardvale Street area or something like that to provide private, I don't want to say mass transit, but busing.
Sure. I will do that, and we'll determine what the assessment implications would be.
I'm also interested, you mentioned the financial impact, if there is any. I'm also interested in maybe some of the non-financial but other impacts. As I was reading it, my first gut reaction to this was, oh, that makes sense. Let's get more folks out to that area. It might be good for the businesses, employees, lots of, might be opportunities there. But it's mass transport. It's now buses, and it's, maybe there's people along the route that wouldn't be particularly jazzed about having buses going down the street. What are the other ramifications? Are there impacts to residents in the area? Are there impacts to the other businesses in the area that maybe they don't want it? I can't even foresee what the negatives are. My first reaction is mostly positive, but maybe there are folks out there listening that are hearing this going, wait a minute, time out. We don't want buses going up our roadway. So either from a residential standpoint or from a public safety standpoint, or are there other impacts, non-financial, that are worthy of consideration that we haven't seen here? And I'd be interested in sort of flushing that out a little bit. And how, I don't exactly know. I think we just need to sort of maybe poll some of the people that are impacted by it potentially.
Okay.
Yes.
Street. In your discussions, maybe you could approach these people. Maybe there could be a private sponsor for one of those mini shuttle buses. Maybe that would fit, rather than having a full-blown bus. Like I know up in Haverhill they almost look like little trolleys or something.
Right.
So there might be other options. Not only could you find a private person, but you may not need a full-blown bus. There are other vehicles.
Like some of the smaller LRTA.
Yeah, just like I said, I mentioned it specifically in Haverhill. I see them. They almost look like little trolley cars. They're obviously not trolley cars, but so something like that. That's actually small enough that a private party could, or a couple of private parties could go in on it. It's a lot cheaper than a full MBTA transit bus.
We have, in fact, been working with the Transportation Management Organization, the TMO, which stands for Enzine. I think the board has met him before, particularly with relationship to the I-93 project. And Mrs. Hamilton has met with him and with Amy Manley to discuss this, to determine whether or not there'd be some interest from the other businesses up in that area to do exactly what you're suggesting, some type of a shuttle service. I'd also mentioned to you that when I had discussions with Ms. Manley last Thursday night, I indicated to her that there is a strong likelihood that there would be an increase in the assessment to the town of Wilmington, and asked if there was some interest on their part in terms of sharing in any of the expenses, and she indicated that there would be. So I'll try to flush all this stuff out. I just wanted to get a sense from the board as to whether or not this was something you were interested in having me pursue, and then I'll get back to you with what it looks like the options would be. I think the questions that Selectman Shampoo raised are important in terms of the specific routes and the times of those routes, and whether we would be adding to the traffic or perhaps decreasing the traffic, depending upon whether or not people now would utilize that service as opposed to driving to the site. I'm not sure what that is, but we'll look at it.
Well, I love the idea of supporting ITT Technical, and it's a good institution, and I'd love to have them stick around and be successful in Wilmington. But I think it's important that we dot our I's and cross our T's, so I appreciate you looking at that.
The board has a copy of a letter from the new sheriff of Middlesex County, Peter Katushin, regarding the 12th Annual Middlesex Youth Public Safety Academy. I know the board is aware that the Middlesex Sheriff's Office has been sponsoring this academy for boys and girls for quite some time now. These are for boys and girls ages 9 through 11. And it's a collaboration between the local communities and the Middlesex Sheriff's Office that has resulted in some successful programs. They work with the school department and in the police departments, and they just wanted to bring this to the board's attention again. If any parent is interested in their child being involved in this program, they can certainly contact the sheriff's office directly, or if they want to contact my office, we can give them phone numbers of the individual that could be contacted. It's my understanding that this has probably already been circulated in the schools, because I know the school department also receives this. So if they're in that age group, they may also want to talk to the school department. The board is being asked to consider executing the collective bargaining agreement between the town of Wilmington and the New England Police Benevolent Association, Local 13, which is the police officers, the police supervisors union. It covers sergeants and lieutenants, 12 in total, and this would be for a 2-year period from July 1, 2011 to June 30, 2013. To the board, it is, as was discussed in the executive session, and so the board is obviously fully aware of this. For the public, it is a 2-year contract that we have been informed by the Police Supervisors Union that they are in agreement with it. It was something that was reached at the contractual agreement reached at the table, so to say. The 2-year contract would be effective this coming July 1, and it would go through June 30th of 2013. In terms of any of the major changes, we discussed the detail rate, and that has been determined to remain the same. It is the same detail rate that has been in effect since February of 2007. The one change that we put into this is new language that says that the detail rate will now be established based upon the rate for flagging in the Commonwealth as determined by the Department of Labor. And the reason why we suggested doing this was because there was always a concern that it would be less expensive for hiring flagmen. Well, that's not necessarily the case, as we found out, believe it or not, because of prevailing wage rates in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So at this point, the detail rate for police officers for a private detail is $40. For a public detail, that is a detail for the town, or such as the elections, or for town road work, or for the school department at a basketball or Thanksgiving football game, for example, it's $30. So we do get quite a difference there, and we're establishing going forward that it'll be this rate, or it'll be the rate. It'll only increase when the flagging rate increases. The flag rate right now in this area, this geographic area, is around $37. So I think this is a a good thing for the town, and it ensures that we have police officers out there paying them the same money that we would have to pay a flagman, and in this case, we would actually have services of a uniformed police officer. In terms of compensation, effective July 1st, there is no raise in pay. The pay will remain as is, a 0% increase. It will increase 6 months into the first year of the contract by 1%. And then effective July 1st, 2012, in the second year of the contract, it'll increase by 2.5%. So the net effect in compensation is a 3% increase over 2 years. There is a $50 increase to police officers who maintain EMT certification. We've eliminated language in the contract that would require the town to impact bargain with regard to the use of defibrillators. We have eliminated in the contract the early retirement provision in its entirety. The early retirement provision is something that has given police officers who are eligible, who work for a period of time and who retire prior to a particular date, the opportunity to earn an increase in the last year of pay by 15%. That has been eliminated in its entirety. It's no longer a part of the contract. We've eliminated compensatory time language. We have reduced sick time allowance. It has been a common standard at least with municipal unions, municipal workers, to have 15 sick days a month where they earn a day and a quarter, 15 sick days a year where they earn a day and a quarter a month. In this case, we're going from 15 to 12 days. I don't know where else in the Commonwealth that's ever happened, but so we will be reducing sick days from 15 days to 12 days, and correspondingly, we decrease the amount of sick days that an officer would be eligible to buy back. We also freeze the total accumulation of sick time to 165 days, where an officer who is going to retire, in the past they could accumulate up to 210 days. We decrease that to 165 days. And we also get better control over the accumulation of vacation entitlement, where they can no longer be allowed to carry excess days. They can only carry their regular entitlement plus whatever another annual entitlement would be. It also eliminates standby pay as well. Now, obviously, these were a number of give-backs. The important change for the police supervisors is that we continue the police incentive plan relative to the Quinn bill, where right now we have been paying the full freight on Quinn bill. This means that we will continue to pay the entire amount of the Quinn bill for the police supervisors. That in itself is not the only story. The fact is that as of 2009, there will be no other officers eligible to receive that Quinn bill payment. So, way down the road, there would be an eventual savings, but right now, we would make sure that we continue the institution of the Quinn bill. I think all in all, it's a pretty good package. I think it's something that is fair to both sides and something that the town can afford. And I know the board has completely vetted this out as they are supposed to do in executive session, but if the board has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we would need to have a vote to execute the contract, and I have contracts available for signature.
Just before calling for the vote, I'd just like to make just a general comment. I think that, especially in light of the Quinn bill and the challenges that poses for every town, but obviously Wilmington is included in that, I think that this contract is a good example of how, at the end of the day, things are done that make sense. And I think this union in particular came to the table early on in recent years and understood the situation that the town and every town was in. And I thought, in the end, the contract makes sense. I mean, the different things that the manager outlined relative to the flaggers and the impact bargaining, et cetera, they're the kinds of things that, if you really had a conversation with residents that get into the details of a collective bargaining agreement, they would understand and think makes sense. And I think that came through on both sides of the table on this. Any other questions, comments, or a motion?
I'd make a motion that the town of Wilmington enter an agreement with the New England Police Benevolent Association Local 13, Police Supervisors Union, as for the period of July 1st, 2011 through June 30th of 2013, and including what the manager stated about the rates.
In a motion? And a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Anything further? All in favor? That's unanimous.
I'm also pleased to advise the board that, also consistent with what your determination was in executive session, but as you know, we were waiting for the final determination of the Local 1 Patrolmen's Union, that we have reached an agreement with the New England Police Benevolent Association Local 1, which represents patrolmen, all of those other folks that are in uniformed police officers, again with the exception of the chief and the deputy, who are not part of a union. And in this case, we're asking the board to do two things. First, to consider executing an addendum to the existing collective bargaining agreement with the town of Wilmington for a period of 1 year, which it would extend the current agreement to June 30th of 2010, and then to consider a 3-year contract for the period July 1, 2010 through June 30, 2013. Now, the first agreement, as the board is aware, would simply extend the current contract as is. There would be no increase in salary. It would be 0% for the first year. This goes back and covers fiscal year 2010.
We could take that one on first before we get into the other one. Do we have questions, comments, or a motion on the addendum to the agreement for July 1, 2006 through June 30th, 2009, which would extend through June 30th of 2010?
No, I guess I will move that the Board of Selectmen approve the addendum to the contract, extending it from July 1st, 2006 through June 30th, 2009.
We're extending for 1 year the current agreement, which is the July 1, 2006 through June 30th, 2009 agreement. So the motion would be to extend it for a period of 1 year to June 30, 2010, with all terms and provisions to remain in effect.
I was looking for the sentence that I could read. You just read it, so I would move to the effect of what the town manager just read.
Do we have a second?
I'd second that.
Made and seconded. Anything further? All in favor? Unanimous?
Thank you. And then we're asking the consideration to sign the 3-year agreement from July 1, 2010 to June 30th, 2013. The only changes would be the salary, which would be 2.5% raises in each of those 3 years, and a language change in the compensatory time that may be accrued, which is really, it goes from 32 hours to 36 hours. It's only being made to really make bookkeeping a little easier. There's no financial gain in this, but because of the shifts that are worked, we would just make that one change. Within that, the language of the compensatory agreement, however, We would also say that compensatory time may be accumulated through shift work or at the discretion of the police chief for other authorized assignments on a case-by-case basis, and those discretionary decisions would not establish a precedent. So it gives full authority to the police chief to determine when compensatory time can be granted. Compensatory time is an advantage that the town will have from time to time when a police officer, instead of being paid overtime, takes time off instead. And those are the only two changes to the contract. There is no change in any other language.
Any questions, comments, or motion?
Who wants to make it? I would move that we approve the contract for a 3-year period starting July 1st, 2010 through June 30th, 2013, per the agreement that was just outlined by the town manager.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Made and seconded. Anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, at the last meeting, we noted that the Town of Wilmington Scholarship Fund Committee needed to fill vacancies. The board was being asked to consider making appointments at that time and wanted to have time to see if there was any interest, and also to give the superintendent of schools an opportunity to weigh in as well. I provided you with a memorandum to that effect. The board may wish to consider appointing 2 new members to the above referenced committee. The names of Michelle Norton, who is a retired educator and most recently principal of the North Intermediate School, and Lisa Troy, who holds a PhD in physical therapy, have been forwarded to this office. Joanne Benton, superintendent of schools, has suggested Ms. Norton, and Selectman Shampoo has suggested Ms. Troy. Both individuals have expressed a willingness to serve. I would note that the law governing the establishment and operation of the committee requires the composition to include the superintendent of schools and, quote, no fewer than 4 residents of the town appointed by the Board of Selectmen for a term of 3 years. Over the years, the committee has included between 5 and 6 members. As chairperson of the committee, the superintendent of schools does not object to a 6-member committee and believes that an increase from 5 to 6 members would be appropriate. And in the interest of full disclosure, you are advised that Ms. Norton is my sister. So this may be somewhat of a Solomon-like approach to this situation, but in fact, it has been customary to have as many as 6. There may have been 7 at one point. The law just requires that there be no fewer than 5, the superintendent and 4 other residents of the town. So I just bring this to the board's attention if they're interested in moving forward.
Solomon would have split them in half and then appointed both halves. The board inclined to take action on this evening. If so, we'll take motions or questions or comments.
Well, if I may, as a comment, as Mr. Kyra just outlined, I had suggested Lisa Troy as a candidate for this. I had spoken to her some time ago about service to the town, and because of just life situations and other things, it wasn't something she wanted to tackle at that time. This, however, was something that she was very interested in. She does have children in the schools, but she's a very intelligent lady, very articulate person, and I think the town would be very well served with her lending her thoughts and voice to this committee. So I hope you'll think favorably of her and vote that way. So thank you very much for considering her as well. That said, unless there's other comments, I would be where I put her name out. Can I move that we vote, or do I have to sort of step back?
No.
Yeah, no. Then I would like to move that we vote to approve both Lisa Troy as well as Michelle Nortman, is that correct? To seats on the Wilmington Scholarship Fund Committee.
Second.
Made and seconded, anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous?
Thanks to them for their service.
The board has a correspondence authored by Tom Pizzara, who is asking that the board consider dedicating a bench at the town common in honor of Kim Forty, who you know was tragically killed in an accident back in February of this year. So that would, I've indicated to Mr. Pizzara, who I believe is now working with the woman of Wilmington, that this is something that the board would have to authorize. And if so, we can work with them. The reason that Mr. Pizzara has given for this in terms of its appropriateness would be because Kim Forty was involved in the original races that were held at the 4th of July celebrations. And he's also noted that the 4th of July committee is changing the name of the Ladies 2 Mile Walk to the Kim Forty Ladies 2 Mile Walk. And he thought having a plaque on a bench in the common would be appropriate, because that is the location where they have started the race, and where he believes over the years Miss Forty and others have been at that particular location.
The one comment that I would offer is that historically, several years ago now, but I know that town meeting passed a bylaw that ensures that when parks and buildings and fields are named after anybody that goes before town meeting, I don't think that bylaw would apply to a memorial on a bench, and I only just put that out there in case other folks have kind of been down a similar road, but something that's a little bit different. They might just be reminded that it's a little bit different for fields and buildings and whatnot. Anybody have any questions, comments, or a motion on what's before us?
I make a motion that we grant the request.
I'd second it.
Made and seconded. Anything further?
Yeah, I just want to compliment Mr. Pizzara and all of the folks that I know this comes not just from Mr. Pizzara's mind. I'm certain that it comes from conversations that he's had with a number of folks, including the women of Wilmington. So obviously it's such a remarkable tragedy what happened that I think this is a fitting tribute to a person who's had a great impact on many people's lives. So I'm glad we're having the opportunity to take this vote this evening.
Anything else? All in favor? It's unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, the board has a letter from Kristen Stokes on behalf of residents of Jacob Street seeking to have a neighborhood block party on Saturday, June 18th from 2 p.m. To 8 p.m. They would like, with your permission, to close Jacob Street from Faulkner Avenue to Cunningham Street for that time period.
I move to grant the request.
Motion, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And seconded, anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous.
It has been customary that at this particular meeting, the board consider their summer meeting schedule. We have been meeting both the second and fourth Mondays in June, but in July and in August, the board has, unless needed, traditionally had one meeting in each of those months. In the past, they have met closer to the Monday that was in the middle of the month, in order to give enough separation for business. And consistent with last year's dates, I would propose that the board consider the third Monday of July and the third Monday of August. However, this was just a suggestion, and the board may want to meet the regular times, but this is when you usually take it up. And those dates, if you were interested in those dates, would be July 18th and August 15th. But again, it's totally up to the board.
Questions, comments, or motion?
I have no problem with that. If down the road, if someone has a vacation during that time, we need to make appropriate changes, we can do that. So I'd make a motion that we incorporate June 18th and July, no, I'm sorry, I didn't see it in front of me, July 18th and August 15th as summer schedules for those 2 months.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All set? See them?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're splitting.
It's way over there.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous.
That leaves open, maybe you already said it and I was staring at the wall, that leaves open the possibility if something comes up that demands our attention, that we gather if needed.
Sure does.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just want to, I know this is not on the agenda, but you may have read about this in the newspaper yesterday in terms of a settlement that the Attorney General reached with Wheelabrator relative to some environmental issues. And I did get a phone call and an email today from the Attorney General's office to officially indicate to us that there was this settlement with Wheelabrator, and it would return $56,951.52 to the town of Wilmington. This is a result of a settlement resolving environmental violations that were allegedly committed by the operator of the municipal waste incinerators, Wheelabrator Saugus and Wheelabrator North Andover. Allegedly, they committed multiple violations of the Hazardous Waste Management Act by failing to properly treat and dispose of ash, and the Clean Air Act by failing to contain fugitive ash. And it's a part of a $7.5 million settlement that was reached on May 2nd. The Attorney General's office has determined that the state and the communities involved would all receive certain settlement amounts. And the amount for the town of Wilmington was $56,951, as I indicated. Under the terms of the settlement, Wheelabrator agreed to pay a total of $7.5 million, $4.5 million to create a municipal relief fund. $3.5 million of that amount will be distributed to municipalities after paying a statutory share to the whistleblowers who brought the matter to the government's attention. 2 payments totaling $2 million for civil penalties arising from multiple environmental violations, $500,000 donation to the Massachusetts Natural Resource Damages Trust, and $500,000 for a supplemental environmental project or projects to be approved by Mass DEP and the Attorney General's office that would improve the environment in the vicinity of the Wheelabrator facilities. So this is interesting news. I can tell you the funds are not restricted. Each municipality will determine how to use the money. We will await for specific instructions from the Department of Revenue in terms of just what that means. Typically, if it's completely unrestricted, it can be just treated as a grant, but it very well may be subject to appropriation, and that is that the money would go into the general fund, and then, the opportunity to spend it would be available through the town meeting action. But we'll certainly report back, but since this news is sort of breaking news, I wanted to let the board be aware of this settlement and the financial impact on the town.
Always happy to receive news like that from you, Mr. Carter.
You don't always want to take a call from the Attorney General's office. That completes the regular business before the board, Mr. Chairman.
Public comments? Yes.
Stuart, we talked about Concord Street. You developed, we had 2 questions that the board could either be answered tonight or taken under advisement. I was researching fencing regulations, and this appears to me as though it's still in effect. Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 49, Section 1. It says that the Board of Selectmen shall annually appoint 2 or more fence viewers. And I was curious as to whether or not the town of Wilmington has a fence viewer or is aware of that regulation. If I may be incorrect, it appears to me, though, it's still in effect. enforced. So I'd like to point that out to the board, that I'm asking the question, do we annually appoint, as it says, shall appoint?
Yeah, we'll refer that to council. I couldn't have cited you chapter and verse, but I'm vaguely familiar with that statute. We'll ask that question of council.
In my research and comments and questions of people, this has come up in the conversations about the fence viewer, so I'd like to ask, so if you get back to me, I appreciate that. Second question has to do with
the statutory reference.
Chapter 49, Section 1.
Chapter 49, Section 1. Section 1, the mayor of each city, subject to confirmation by the city council.
No, I'm fine with that. I
Okay, great.
just wanted the reference.
Second question has to do with the April 19th Board of Health meeting. There was a guest speaker on the cancer study, and Jerry O'Reilly was a 79-year-old senior citizen who a lot of people in town know, had made a comment, and it may or may not have been, subject to your personal opinion, made a comment relative to the contamination problem in town, and he was being very civil, and whether or not the question was totally appropriate or not, that's a different question. But I was in attendance at that meeting, and my opinion was that this question came up when prefaced that we went through the appointments last week, and Elizabeth Zaborjian was reappointed to the Board of Health. I didn't know that was coming up. But my question is, as chairman of the Board of Health, she immediately cut off Jerry's comment, and under his civil rights, he could ask a comment. He was acting civilly. She immediately went to, I can have you forcefully removed from this meeting. And I think that was totally inappropriate. And I would like to, I think that there were two selectmen present at the meeting. One of them may not be here tonight. But I would like to comment from the board, if they thought that was appropriate, to immediately go to a 79-year-old senior citizen who's kind of prominent in town, to almost immediately go to forceful ejection while he was still having a civil conversation with her. I thought that was totally inappropriate. I'd like to comment from the Board of Selectmen.
I'm not, the chairperson that you're referring to isn't here. In all fairness, we're getting one perspective. If you're, I would say this, in terms of new business, I think that if you are raising a question as to the conduct of the Board of Health meetings, we take that comment for what it's worth, and if selectmen want to find out more, certainly we can. I think that's the fair way to. I didn't want to cut you off, but it's really not fair, I think, to comment when the chairperson's not here either.
That was a fair response. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'd like to comment if I could, however, Mike. I was there, Mr. Lingenfelter, and I know, I can't remember exactly what the nature of the question was, but I do know that the gentleman was he from Mass DEP? I'm not really sure what board he represented, but anyway, the gentleman that was here speaking about the study was here specifically for that purpose, and really that was his only competency in terms of what he had knowledge to be able to speak about. And Mr. O'Reilly was asking a question that was way outside of the scope of not only what the meeting was discussing, but also outside of the scope of what this gentleman was, what his core competencies are, what his knowledge base is. And so when the chairwoman asked Mr. O'Reilly to, rephrase the question or try to keep the content of the question within what the gentleman was here to talk about, there was some, challenge back and forth. And so it did get elevated, admittedly, and one could make the argument that perhaps the chairwoman jumped a little quickly. However, I was of the mind, and I am still, that it was handled as appropriately as it could have been. And frankly, if it happened in this room, I think that it would have been appropriate to handle it in very much the same way. Again, it depends on the perspective. Everything you say about Mr. O'Reilly is certainly true. I admire him for his zeal and for his energy and his commitment to the town and for all of the things that he holds dear. But in the particular context that you refer, what you say, I wanted to be able to acknowledge, because in the absence of me sharing my viewpoint on it, yours is out there, and everyone, no one has any other context to consider it. There is another context, and I do believe that the chairwoman acted fairly and appropriately, and I guess I'll just leave it at that as well. There were the circumstances were such that it needed to be, the conversation needed to end and be rerouted back to the subject matter at hand. So.
Comment?
I tell you what, let's do this. I think it was only fair to allow Mr. Shampoo to respond, even though I was trying not to get down that road and get in a debate, when the two principals involved in this exchange weren't here. I'm not looking to give any party the last word, but I feel like both views have been expressed.
Okay.
I would ask, without those two principals here, can we...
I wasn't going to continue it. I was going to say, I grant your point, he was off topic, and I'm not arguing that point. And I think Chairman Somali handled Mr. McDonald better, from my point of view. My only comment was, I don't think it was appropriate to go there until 2 or 3 more back and forth. But that's all I wanted to, I think that was very quick and abrupt. That's all I want to leave it at. Thank you.
Okay, we can leave it at that?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Any other public comment? New business or committee reports?
I'm fine.
Anything down here?
No, I know we're going to talk about Memorial Day in just a few minutes, and I just want to say, go Memorial Day. We'll look forward to seeing everyone out next Monday. It's going to be beautiful out. The long-range forecast is for 70 degrees and sun, so we'll see everybody out on Memorial Day, and hopefully come down to the cemetery and enjoy the moving ceremony that goes on down there as well. So thank you very much.
Nothing this evening. Thank you.
My dates run together, so I apologize. I do believe that the public information session regarding the high school building project was since our last meeting. So just to report back that I thought that was a very productive meeting. WCTV was there providing coverage. I haven't caught it myself, but I'm sure that that's on the television for folks who want to tune in and check out. What occurred on May 12th? Was that the right date?
Yes.
And I know it's under important dates here, but just to underscore the importance of that, third public information meeting scheduled for June 7th at the high school auditorium, which I'm sure the manager's going to include in important dates.
Under important dates, we have the Memorial Day Parade coming up on May 30th. It kicks off at 10 a.m. Selectmen are asked to be at the Market Basket parking lot approximately 9:30. And the parade will continue into the Wildwood Cemetery, where there will be a ceremony at that time. Town offices obviously are closed on May 30th. Remind folks that if they're interested, the 4th of July Chamber of Commerce luncheon is June 1st at the Knights of Columbus. Shawshing Tech will hold its graduation on the evening of June 2nd. Saturday, June 4th, the Fishing Derby. It's a pretty popular event that is conducted by the Recreation Department. Will be held from 9 a.m. to noon at the town beach. All fisher people are welcome. June 5th, the Wilmington High School class of 2011 will have their graduation that afternoon. And on June 7th, as the chairman has mentioned, the high school building project will continue with a public information meeting sponsored by the high school building committee. It will again be held at the high school auditorium at 6:30 p.m. Town Beach will open this year a little early, June 11th, and by that I mean the Silver Lake will be covered with lifeguards on that date. And then during that same weekend, June 11th and 12th, the Council for the Arts will be holding their 31st annual art exhibition that is conducted on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Sunday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. There's still time for artists to register. The deadline is Friday, May 27th. The Board of Selectmen meets on the 13th. The next day is the flag retirement ceremony at Minuteman headquarters at 6 p.m. And just advance notice of the Relay for Life is coming up, the third annual Wilmington Relay for Life at the high school, Friday from June 17th to Saturday morning, June 18th.
We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Made and seconded. All in favor? Unanimous?